one slight dip in whatever measurements they have, and then they're like, "Oh my God, you're losing me money." All right, today I want to talk about this Wall Street Journal article that I found. This is a follow-up to the video where I reacted to one about the trouble of finding people to work the manufacturing jobs. This one here is How America Lost Manufacturing by Amal Naj. So if the previous one I read and reacted to was about the difficulty with finding someone in 2025 to work, this one is about how we got here. Without further ado, let's get right into it. As a reporter in the 1980s, I watched U.S. industries as they failed to adapt to foreign competition. By putting eye-popping tariffs on imports, President Trump hopes to bring manufacturing back home. What his administration overlooks is U.S. industries' culpability in the current state of affairs. It's an open question whether American companies can change course. President Reagan tried. His administration used a variety of tactics in the 80s to restrict steel and auto imports, giving U.S. manufacturers time to remake themselves in the face of a formidable foreign onslaught. Huh. Seems like both their strategies is pretty much make it more difficult to send work overseas. Hey, if it's gonna cost them less to send it overseas, let's use tariffs to make it more expensive to do that. But domestic manufacturers failed to rise to the occasion and failed miserably, as I witnessed as a reporter for the Journal covering America's industrial belt at its most pivotal moment of decline. That failure foreshadowed what has become a national concern today: our extraordinarily heavy reliance on manufacturing offshore in industries critical to our national security and economy. Last year, steel, autos, machinery, electrical equipment, and pharmaceuticals together accounted for 77.5% of the country's $1.2 trillion trade deficit. Take the auto industry. Only about half of new cars sold in the US in 2024 were manufactured locally, and many these had imported parts. Well, some parts might have to be imported. I mean, at a certain point, there's only so much that can be produced domestically. In the 80s, it was a common refrain that if General Motors, America's largest industrial enterprise, sneezed, the rest of the country caught a cold. Steel and a host of other industries depended on the car industry's well-being. So did many U.S. workers and consumers. But in the face of growing foreign threats, American manufacturers seemed in denial. Seemingly thinking they could never be knocked off their pedestals, they changed little about how they fundamentally operated. Unions didn't help. The United Steelworkers and the United Auto Workers viewed U.S. import restraints simply as means for protecting their jobs and their wages, which were twice those in Japan. The unions also resisted companies' attempts to revise outdated union job classifications to combine tasks into one employee's workload to bolster productivity. Business leaders failed to win over the labor unions with a promising master plan to protect their future as well as the companies' against imports, but firms seemed incapable of articulating one. If anything, automakers sent a confusing message about the fight with foreign competition. Even as they asked workers to sacrifice, the companies got in bed with the enemy. GM signed deals with Japan's Isuzu and Suzuki to import their cars into the US, and subsequently formed a joint venture with Toyota. Other automakers struck similar deals with Japanese competitors, including joining hands to build cars in the US. GM then shamelessly lobbied to raise import quotas so it could bring in cars from Japan. The American companies professed that they wanted to learn from the Japanese before launching new high-tech factories themselves. I mean, you could always just visit their factories and note everything they do and then see what you can adapt here. I mean, that's what I'd do. Like, I'll admit, sometimes I watch other YouTube channels and I see what can I adapt here. Even if taken in good faith, this was a bad call. US automakers would eventually invest billions in new technology and automation to remake their Henry Ford era assembly operations. GM called its venture Saturn, Ford's was Alpha, and Chrysler's was Liberty. They aimed to reduce drastically the parts and labor that went into a car, to close the gap on the Japanese cost advantage of $2,000 a vehicle, and they planned to do it in roughly 4 years. In 1986, GM unveiled its $600 million plant in Hamtramck, Michigan, on Detroit's east side, to showcase industrial high technology, but the robots broke down easily and were prone to error. They welded the wrong joints and missed spots when spray painting cars. Sometimes they sprayed each other. Workers couldn't get the complicated machines with their programmable instructions and electronic sensors to communicate with each other and pass tasks to the next station. I have bolted 50 wrong bumpers. Cadillac on an Olds on a Buick on a Cadillac. A worker bolting robot chosen parts told me on a visit to the plant. The final blow to American automakers came when Japanese manufacturers set up plants across the US. The Mazda plant just south of Detroit began producing cars for 25% less cost than GM, on American soil, with American workers. Hey, they're providing American jobs at the very least. Also, the robot thing goes to show how all the predictions were wrong about the machine takeover. They weren't going to be doing all the manual labor that requires more dexterity of the human hands, like what the fingers and opposable thumbs can do. See, at this point, they might be better off just, if they really want to have robots do specialized tasks like that, they're gonna have to shape them like the human hand. I don't know why I'm doing the John Cena "you can't see me" pose, but you get the idea. Because a lot of these tasks are apparently a lot more specialized than we realized. Everyone was all like, "The machines are gonna be building our things. We're quick, everyone, become knowledge workers so that we can outpace the machines, and then you'll still have a job." Apparently, it's the other way around. AI like ChatGPT does all the knowledge stuff. Still got a ways to go, but it's getting there. And then this article just proves that machines aren't quite there with the manual labor. I think deep down that's what all of us wanted anyway, but that's not what we have so far. Frankly, I wouldn't be against it, but for now, we have to work on improving the machines, you know? Run a great many more tests, as the engineer girl in Moana 2 said. Yeah, that character only stuck out to me because she sounded just like Omega from The Bad Batch. And I was like, did they get Michelle Ang to voice her? No, it wasn't Michelle Ang. Other than that, disappointing follow-up to the original. It should have stayed as a Disney Plus original. The US auto industry's demise inflicted a collateral damage on other domestic manufacturing. Steelmakers, with their umbilical cord tied to Detroit, had hobbled along after automakers' lead without much thought to foreign competition until it was too late. There had been little talk in boardrooms of modernizing their age-old blast furnaces or adopting new technologies and production approaches, such as electric arc furnaces to make cheaper steel from scraps. In the early 80s, domestic customers, from Canon Appliance to automotive part producers, turned to foreign suppliers for better prices and quality. Ford abandoned its storied Rogue steel plant in Dearborn, Michigan, blaming the union. In succession, steel businesses closed, merged, or disappeared into companies steel workers had never heard of. These were manufacturers whose names had evoked the might of American industrial power, with their miles-long factories converting iron ore in mammoth blast furnaces and rolling mills. Bethlehem Steel, Jones and Laughlin, National Steel, and Republic Steel. The last of the great American steel makers, U.S. Steel, once the world's largest, is now fighting for its life. In 2023, it agreed to be owned by a Japanese company, Nippon Steel. You know what? I just remembered, I think U.S. Steel was something I learned about in U.S. history too. Yeah, junior year. Sophomore year is U.S. history one, which covered the American Revolution up to, um, I think the Civil War. Yeah, yeah, I think it was the Revolutionary War to the Civil War, and then U.S. history 2 is after that, all the way up to the early 2000s. I mean, that's as far as the textbook went. I remember seeing a picture of George W. Bush in there, and then also the major act of terror that happened during his first year. Geez, I wonder what the U.S. history textbooks say about the time when I was in high school now. God, I'm old. But yeah, U.S. Steel is pretty much the. I think it was a monopoly at one point, and it was one of the big companies that they had to eventually break up to encourage competition. Kind of like the movie theaters being separated from the studios. For those of you who don't know, up until World War II, movie theaters were owned by the movie studios, but the government broke it up to encourage competition. And now, streaming services are owned by the very studios that are putting out their movies into the theaters. Maybe we need to have an antitrust suit like that for that. But getting back to manufacturing, I think they need to make a better plan for making the transition, Start with manufacturing here with importing where you have to, and then eventually wind down the imports until you eventually reach the point where you're able to produce everything from beginning to end here in the US. It's just like with Daenerys trying to free the slavers in Slaver's Bay. You've got to have it be a transition. You can't just make these kinds of changes overnight. I mean, it would be nice to be able to make these changes overnight. Anyway, let's get back to the article. The robots that US automakers had embraced also fell by the wayside. The American inventor of industrial robots, Unimation, along with others that jumped into the business, such as Westinghouse and General Electric, quit. Japan, which licensed the technology from the US, is now a major robot manufacturer, along with South Korea and China. Our basic approach was wrong, the head of Westinghouse's Advanced Technology Group told me in 1990. It was a classic case of trying to merge an entrepreneurial organization into a relatively slow-moving, large American corporation. Far from learning from their mistakes, US automakers repeated them as foreign competition intensified. In the early 90s, GM, Ford, and Chrysler spent billions to develop electric cars. GM unveiled its first commercial electric car in 1996, but eventually, these manufacturers gave up because they couldn't see the future. It was as if Henry Ford had built his Model T before the discovery of gasoline, an auto executive lamented. GM's then chairman, Roger Smith, admitted in 1986 that the car maker was mistaken in believing it could fundamentally change manufacturing with technology in one fell swoop. Thousands of little innovations in manufacturing have nothing to do with automation, but find fruitful application through trial and error, what's known in industry as continuous improvement. Or as What's Her Face from Moana 2 would say, we run the tests again and again until we figure out the something. I just remember that part of it. Why am I even bothering remembering a movie that I know uh, that I have no intention of watching again because it was pure streaming slop converted into theatrically released slop. Aimed at cutting costs and enhancing quality, these innovations evolve over time. Humans, not technology, drive the process. In the future, Mr. Smith vowed, solid human partnerships will form the ground floor on which high technology systems will be built. So, they're all going to be Robocop, or I guess Robo Assembly person. That's probably the word they'd use because they would want to be gender inclusive. Maybe Robo. If you have any suggestions for a portmanteau between robot and assembly worker or something like that, like Robo Blank, please let me know in the comments down below. I'm drawing a blank myself right now. American manufacturers have always known that remaking domestic manufacturing would be hard. It would require winning labor concessions, investments in training workers in new skills, creating a factory culture that fostered creativity and innovation on the floor level, and taking a longer view on the investments to fight competition. Instead, companies circumvented these challenges by relocating offshore. They took their business wherever they could make money. Shareholders demanded it. They didn't lie awake worrying about trade imbalances. Why would they now? Okay, I see the real problem now. The real problem isn't tariffs or lack thereof. The real problem is shareholders. Yeah, I'm just gonna say it. Publicly owned companies, if I owned a company, I would never take it public. Honestly, I would rather go I would rather go out of business than be beholden to a shareholders. Because it's not about the whole thing. If they see one slight dip in whatever measurements they have, and then they're like, "Oh my God, you're losing me money." Yeah, companies have an ebb and flow. I don't know what else to say. Either they have to be okay with the occasional dips, or we just need to stop having companies be publicly traded. Those are literally the only two solutions I can think. It's literally the only solution I can think of at this point. Tariffs? Yeah, Trump can make the importing of. Trump can make it more expensive to send the jobs overseas artificially all day. But when shareholders are like, you have to make me money. You have a fiduciary responsibility, which, legally speaking, they actually do. Watch Succession. That'll teach you everything you need to know about big business like this. So, for those of you who don't know, fiduciary responsibility just means they are legally obligated to do what makes the company the most money or saves it the most money. Whether that's mass layoffs or taking a deal. Like, I remember when Elon was trying to buy Twitter at first. I remember in a Tim Pool video, he said that someone must have violated the fiduciary responsibility by trying to hide the potential Elon deal from whoever it was. And that's why Elon took Twitter off the stock market before rebranding it to X. Said he'd have the freedom to do what he wanted. The point is, I think the real problem is shareholders and being beholden to the stock market rather than being privately owned and being able to do as you see fit. And maybe prioritizing principle where you can, where even if you lose a bit at first, you'll win in the long run. Because shareholders can only see quarter to quarter. They only see the previous quarter and the next quarter. They don't care about 10 quarters from now. But I digress. What do you think of all this? Do you think that tariffs or the shareholders are the real problem? Do you think that What do you think of all the technological solutions and how we can create robo-assembly people by combining human dexterity and ingenuity with the raw strength of a machine or something like that? Let me know in the comments down below whatever RoboCop style workers can come of this. Obviously not fused into it as deeply as RoboCop himself was with the machines. Obviously, we want the assembly workers to be able to go home at the end of the day and not be the cyborgs and get to live their lives outside of work. So yeah, you let me know all about that. You give this video a like, subscribe for daily videos. I'll see you soon.